Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this webinar on making virtual queuing a hit and not a miss. It's a joint webinar between myself, I'm the managing partner, co-founder with Copenhagen Optimization, as well as Mike Tversky from Yline. Yline is a leading virtual queue application, which has deployments globally. And Mike, just over to you with a few words for introductions.
Thanks, Casper. Happy to be here today, and thanks to everyone for joining. As Casper was saying, co-founder of a market-leading virtual queuing and smart appointment scheduling company. We have offices in 5 countries globally. We've serviced close to 25 million customers to date, and we work across industry verticals, including the aviation space, which is a specialty of ours. And Casper and Copenhagen Optimization are a trusted partner of ours, and have been doing tremendous work in this space. So happy to do this webinar jointly with him.
Thanks, Mike. So first question really is, why actually do virtual queuing? So first of all, COVID-19 has brought some challenges on us. First of all, the need to physically distance, and then also once traffic eventually, hopefully not be pretty soon, will start to increase, the queue areas will be insufficient in terms of space. So what can we do with virtual queuing? I mean, for us, there are 3 key elements to this. First of all, it's health and safety. We want to make sure that we can comply and help airports comply with physical distancing. Then I think everybody's under pressure on budgets. So virtual queuing can also be used to drive operational efficiencies and through that decrease cost. And the last element is for passenger wait times. Through virtual queuing, these can be reduced, and if passengers can wait less, they can spend more. So that will drive up revenue on the commercial side of things. So let's look at really what is your ambition for virtual queuing. So we split the sign-up rate. So the sign-up rate is really the amount of passengers that you can actually get to go through virtual queuing into 3 buckets, up to 20%, between 20 and 30%, and then above 30%. And then looking at what is the applicability of virtual queuing in these different sign-up rate modes. So if we look at what we call the lowest sign-up rate, 0 to 20%, it could be a fast track, potentially against the cost. I mean, that's well suited for this fairly low number. Health and safety, the physical distancing, there will be some impact, but it will not be ideal. From operational efficiency standpoint, it may actually have a negative impact. And then on the decreased wait time, since you're only getting less than 20%, the impact will be limited. If we then move into the 20 to 30% range, that's really when virtual queuing can actually start impacting. So the idea of a fast track is probably disappearing because you're now hitting a large portion of passengers. At the same time, physical distancing and lower wait times will be experienced by a large number of passengers. The operational efficiencies really kick in once you move into the above 30% of passenger space, where you can really start to influence how passengers are arriving at the airport, and hence actually go through with shaving off your peaks. So the takeaways that you'll get from today's webinar will produce or present 3 key elements and exemplify how these work in a virtual queue setup. And then really the takeaway is a checklist on what should you consider if wanting to implement virtual queuing. So first, let's just pause a bit on what is actually virtual queuing. So the idea is that passengers can sign up either at home or at the airport. And as they do that, this is a mock-up of how it could look. They're in their check-in process, they're on a Delta flight. They could schedule their appointment at the security checkpoint, and we could really help to recommend a 15-minute slot that will work for them. So that's the at-home sign-up. Alternatively, they could sign up once they're at the airport. They'll be told, okay, you do have a slot and it's coming up in 15 minutes. So there's also the consideration, when is virtual queuing relevant for your airport? First of all, you need to have some wait times. If there is no queue to virtualize, there's not really a need for virtual queuing. So again, think of areas where you would have average wait times above 5 minutes. Typically, security is a prime example of this. So that's really, you got to have some queuing. Hopefully not as much as on the left side, but also not as little as on the right side. Next one is, it would be good to have a potential for peak shaving. So if you have a completely flat schedule where passengers are just coming regularly in a nice fashion across the day, then it's probably not for you. The good thing is there are very few airports that look like that. Most airports are looking something like that with a day with peaks and troughs going through. So what we really want is to target these peaks and see, okay, can we fill up the valleys? Is there any way we can shave all these peaks? And then instead of having a passenger arrival curve like this, we'll have one which is more even and more controllable across the day, and then get away from the really high peaks that airports are known for. Last element that we'll highlight here is the need to have the right infrastructural layout. So first example, here's a check-in aisle, here's a flow area to the security queue area. So what you're left with here is left and right on the screen, you'll have waiting space. If you're having a virtual queue set up, you need to have the passengers actually virtually queue somewhere. They're not going to disappear. So if you have a setup where there's very little distance between check-in and security, and there's not a lot of, say, F&B or other waiting areas in your landside area, it may be a little bit tough on having virtual queuing, especially when we talk about the sign up at airport. For this setup, it would really be pushing the pre-booking, so the passengers would arrive and then go straight to the security area. Another area could be something like this, where you have a check-in area where you didn't have ample capacity and waiting space and F&B units before the security queue area. Large volume of virtual queue booking on site could be an option. Again, that's not our preference, but in this case, it would work. So now let's get into the bulk of the presentation. How do we make virtual queuing a hit and not a miss? So just there are 3 elements to consider on this journey. The first one is signing up passengers. So how do we make sure that we get these sign-up rates to the level of our ambition? Second is, how do we then plan the virtual queue slot assignment? So which passengers will be assigned which slots? And third, how are we going to look at the operational process at the airport? So with this, I'm going to hand over to Mike to go through the first 2 elements. So Mike, it's on you now.
Great, thanks, Casper. So digging into the first 2 elements, the first one, as Casper mentioned, signing up passengers. So there are a couple of key focal points that are important to drive home here. Number one, you have a number of different stakeholders that you need approval for and close coordination with. You have TSA, you have the airlines, you have the airports, and of course you have to incentivize the passengers. So that means the value drivers that you are bringing to this solution is number one, a fast track, stress-free, anxiety-free experience where you have pristine visibility into when you're going to be serviced through security checkpoints without having the fear of waiting in a long winding serpentine queue and standing like sardines next to other folks and worry about the passage of communicable diseases, which ties into health and safety aspect, obviously. For an operational efficiency standpoint, by flattening out the curve and more optimal alignment of both real estate and resource allocation against passenger arrivals into the airport, there are ROI gains to be reaped from the airport perspective as well. And of course, lower passenger wait times, which are a win-win for everybody. I mentioned the partnership with airlines. This is key as well. So we are going to show some illustrative customer journey screens as we go with this solution. In addition to this, we can also integrate this technology with ride-sharing companies such as Uber or Lyft, which is another interesting element to this as well. We don't have to make this a mandatory sign up. Again, as Casper mentioned, we get the flattening of the curve once we hit the hurdle rates of 20 to 30%. So this is not something where we need 100% participation for. We're not shooting for astronomical rates. With those low sign-up rates, this is very much achievable, and of course commensurate with incentivizing them through, of course, lower wait times, the guarantee of that, and also promotional offers that we can link to the concession stands, which, by the way, we can do virtual queuing for as well. Next slide, please. This is just, as I mentioned, an illustrative customer journey fragment of how it would look for the end user. So when they check in for their flight up to 24 hours before and up to a couple hours before, they have the ability to also pre-book their slot to go through security, where they're given 15-minute increments. The slot duration and the number of passengers per slot is completely customizable, although we'll go in a little bit more detail in a moment why we think 15-minute increments are important. And then the amount of information that we aggregate, clearly we're sensitive to PII, so we work closely with the privacy teams and GDPR teams, as well as our cloud provider, AWS, with access to AWS GovCloud. So we want to make sure we're aggregating the right amount of information there and giving them the appropriate instructions on when to be there and which security gate to go through. The other illustrative concept is, as I mentioned, with the ride-sharing agencies, we do have the capability to embed this within Uber as an example, where the passenger not only can get a car to the airport with knowledge about how long it'll take to get there, but they would also have the ability to pre-book themselves to go through the security checkpoints without having to wait on site. And the machine learning algorithms that we have would automatically calculate the recommended time slots that they should go through compared with the driving time. And if there is any sort of unexpected traffic or they get there faster than normal, the system would automatically recalculate which slot they would be suited for and automatically put them in that appropriate slot, so the passenger doesn't have to be anxious about missing their turn to go through security. Next slide, please. The other example that we can do is we have QR code signups at the airport as well. So Casper mentioned part of this is pre-booking your slot. The other element of this is the virtual queuing on-site signups that we can see where they are from a geofencing perspective. And they also have the ability to simply scan their phone by turning on the camera against the QR code, which would instantaneously bring them to a web portal that allows them to pre-book their slot on site. And in addition to that, if you see on the next slide, we also have the ability to embed this within the airport's website as well. So again, this is just purely illustrative, but we can tee this up and make it available through the multiple stakeholders that are relevant here. The second element, which is critically important, is planning your VQ slot assignment. So again, as I mentioned, you need to distinguish between pre-bookings and airport signups, the percentage allocation of which can vary by airport depending on the operational and procedural setup, as well as the real estate do they have. Do they have an open, airy check-in lobby, or is everything kind of tight together? So all of this plays into that and can be partitioned and updated dynamically in accordance with that. For pre-booking, as Casper said, we're really just targeting the flights through the predictive models that are deemed to be problematic, so to speak, as it relates to contributing to congestion peaks. So when looking at the live flight schedule and the predicted load factors for those flights, we can say, okay, these are the amount of flights that are going to contribute to those peaks, and we can enable these pre-booking functionalities solely with respect to those passengers on those flights. And again, we're only shooting for 20 to 30%, so it's a pretty low hurdle rate. For the airport sign up, we also must consider, of course, current occupancy levels, close coordination with TSA to understand, are there going to be new lanes opening up or closing, which is also critically important, not to understand where we are now, but where we're going to be in 60 to 120 minutes from now as well. The other nice thing about the on-site queuing is you get to backfill against last-minute cancellations or no-shows from those folks that unfortunately didn't make it from the pre-booking. And this is just purely illustrative, again, to show you in graphical format how shaving those peaks and reallocating those pre-booking slots for those flights that have those high load factors where everybody comes to the airport on those flights at one time, by smoothing out those peaks, you're really flattening the curve, better resource allocation, lower wait times, better and safer social distancing. So it's really a more balanced arrival approach and a win-win for all stakeholders involved. On the next slide, this is, again, a graphical illustration of going through the importance of understanding the procedural setup at the airport, not only with respect to that moment in time, 5 a.m., there could be no wait time, but again, being able to predict the load factors for the arriving passengers into the airport, coupled with close coordination with TSA on, are they opening or closing fewer, more or fewer lanes as we go into the next hour or two. All of this must play into your solution, which is why it's critically important that Casper's solution, as an example, feeds us the right data in order to achieve this. And then this slide is illustrative to show how if we were to allocate 30-minute slots, chances are folks on a predictive model would come towards the front end of that, where you would just be creating bottlenecks elsewhere, That is not what we're looking to achieve. We are looking to evenly spread them out and flatten out that curve. So what we recommend is a 15-minute increments for those that pre-book. And for those that are on site already, and we know they're on site again because of the geofencing and because of the QR code scanning on site, we can do 5-minute increments there. And with that, I will pass it back over to Casper to go through element 3 and finish up.
Yep, thanks, Mike. So now we're at the operational process at the airport. So we have a number of different flows at the airport already. We have what we call non-virtual queuing passengers. Then now we're mixing the virtual queue passengers with the non-virtual queue passengers. So the question is, how do we make sure that the virtual queue passengers actually do get an advantage? So with this, what we've illustrated there is, as Mike said, through the application, you'll get a QR code. Scanning that QR code at an e-gate would then allow you to enter the virtual queue as opposed to the non-virtual queue. On the side, you could also have a fast track product. Some of the key questions here is, once you have a virtual queue and a non-virtual queue with passengers, are you going to keep them 100% separate all the way through, or is it like a pre-queue area where until, say, the last 10 passengers or so before the lane, will you actually have the mix? In the US, it will be more around the travel document check that happens. Maybe the virtual queue is prior to the TDC position, and then after the TDC position, the virtual queue passengers would mix back with the non-virtual queue passengers. What we're really trying to make sure here is that we're not introducing operational inefficiencies. What we want to make sure is that there is ample pressure on all the lanes at the checkpoint, that we're not suddenly having a virtual queue where we're down on passenger volume and where suddenly security checkpoint volume is, or lanes are sitting idle while other parts of the checkpoint is under a lot of pressure. So we absolutely want to safeguard how we're using the lanes, but the upfront queuing is something where we see some good opportunities to have a virtual queue, passenger queue, say, separated from the standard queue. The opening hours for the virtual queue product must be considered. Could these passengers outside, say, peak hours become part of the premium product? That's probably up for discussion. Should this be, to begin with, maybe a peak only product, just to make sure that that's where you get the large volume, and also targeting really the sign up rates of 20 to 30% in the peak is something that we definitely see feasible. And then there's also the considerations around what if a passenger actually missed their virtual queue slot, or the other one, they're early. Maybe I get a slot from 2:30 to 2:45, but I arrive at the airport at 2:05, and then just proceed into the non-virtual queue zone. We need to take that into account. As Mike said, we can right away backfill any cancellations. But at the same time, I think in the planning process, we're also really eager to see, once we start harvesting some data on this, could there be a potential for overbooking? So actually, like, say, in a of course a good way, but slightly overbooking the slots to make sure that if we know that there is a no-show rate of, say, 10 to 15%, we want to make sure that we have a slight overbooking. So now we come to the end, to the checklist. So what is it that you need to consider when you're implementing virtual queuing? So element number one, and I think this is really a key one, I think the airports that are considering this needs to have a solid discussion internally on what's the driver for us here. Are we coming out and using this as kind of a fast track product for a select few passengers? Are we really targeting full on health and safety, operational efficiency, and lower wait times? Like those are the two opposite ends of the scale. And it's just important to know that your strategy for signing up passengers is largely different depending on what you select. The second one is then, how do you make sure virtual queuing is a fit for your airport? So you need to consider your infrastructure. If you have a very tight area around security, pre-booking is absolutely the way you want to go. If you have a more open area, you could allow for more virtual queue sign up at the airport. You want to consider the peak shaving element. As Mike showed, we really want to make sure that we target the right flights for peak shaving, so that we're not suddenly getting passengers that were before outside the peak to now move into the peak hour. That would be detrimental. We want to have the passengers in the peak hour and move outside that peak hour. Third, need to identify your partners for signing up these passengers. As Mike said, we definitely see the airline as a key player here, because they have the passenger contact. But also, of course, the airport signage at the airport level, information to passengers prior to them arriving at the airport, but also like the likes of ride sharing, really have them integrated to their app, and then through that have a solid passenger experience. And then last, what is your planning approach? What is your operational approach? For the planning approach, as Mike showed, it's really key that you have the security operator in place. In the US, that will be TSA. In Canada, it would be CATSA. In most of the European airports, they actually have that within their own control. So that may be easier in setups like that. But I think overall, it's just important that the security operator is on board, because if you're not really having the situational awareness of what's going on right now and what's going to go on into the immediate future, it's going to be extremely hard to assign slots in the right way. And then also the operational process, how are you going to set this up at your airport? Is it going to be for all checkpoints? Is it going to be for a selected number of checkpoints? Can you use this to actually balance the passenger flow across multiple checkpoints in your airport? What is it that you want to do with the virtual queue? And then, of course, from then on, do a successful implementation. So with that, we're going to open up for questions. I'm just going to see if I can see if anything have popped in, but you can use the chat function. There is a question piece where you can ask questions. So here's the first one. Let's see. So one is asking, and this is probably for you, Mike, what's your experience with passengers showing up for their time slot? I would get pretty nervous if I would have a 15-minute time slot assigned. I would probably just show up early and wait in front of the entrance. What's your experience with this?
Yeah, happy to take that one. So, and it's an important question. So we don't want people gaming it to within just a couple minutes of when their flight is scheduled to depart, or when the gate is scheduled to close. So what we're doing here by flattening out the congestion curve, we're incentivizing people, a subset of those people, to come a bit early, to get there comfortably in advance of their flight, with the precise visibility and comfort that they will go in without having to wait. Happier customers tend to spend more once on site, so there is an ROI positive opportunity certainly for the airport when passengers spend more at a concession stand when they are much more calm and anxiety free. But that's the key here. By having them come a bit earlier and incentivizing them to do so with these value propositions, and not having people try to game it to within just a couple of minutes, because you're right, that could theoretically be problematic.
Yeah, and that's actually Mike looking at another question, which was many passengers want to be at the airport last minute before boarding. How the solution can deal with this issue? I think that's something that from the planning parameters you can set that, but I think our recommendation would be that the virtual queue kind of stops assigning slots when you get closer to maybe 60 minutes to your departure time, and then if you want to game it, you will have to do it the normal way and go into the standard queue.
Correct.
Then there is another question on say, have you assessed some capacity bias safety related scenarios regarding the temporary waiting areas where passengers come together and wait for the virtual queue slot? I think that was one of the elements that we touched on. It's really important for the airport to consider their infrastructural layout. If it's not an airport where there's ample space for waiting, well, then virtual queue signups at the airport is not where they should drive their volume. They should drive their volume through the pre-bookings, because the pre-bookings would arrive at the airport and then ideally go through right there. So I think that's really important for us, that we do not just want to export a problem to a different area. We want to make sure that we're actually solving the problem. So I will sift through one more here for you, Mike. If you have an airport with multiple airlines in the same checkpoint, how would that work in terms of the different airlines making passengers sign up?
Yeah, so this one is also really important. When we look at adding the most value quickly and finding the path of least resistance by having the necessary amount of stakeholders, by limiting the complexities and as much as possible, we feel strongly that where we get the most bang for our buck here in terms of value prop is working with airports in specific terminals that are dominated solely really by one carrier. So when you're just working with that one airline to enable this functionality through their app, and then of course looping in clearly the airport and security, it limits the amount of stakeholders and the complexities there. So that's why it's really important that we find the right opportunities with those terminals as well.
Yeah, then here's another one. If you do not do peak shaving, then the number of passengers and staffing is the same in the peak hour with or without the virtual queue. And then for every person in the virtual queue that you give a lower wait time, one person in the physical queue will get a higher wait time. And then the question is that fair? And I think that's a relevant point. I think this has to be implemented in a well thought through way. So at the same time, we do want to really embark on pushing up the share of passengers using the virtual queue. So I mean, I myself would probably jump at it right away just because I hate to wait, but other people may be a little bit slower. But if they consistently will see that there's somebody at the checkpoint waiting shorter because they signed up, that may be a good indication for them to sign up for virtual queuing the next time. But I do see the potential of this exploding in the press if you're not really doing a fair evaluation. But I think that's one thing that needs to be considered as you're introducing your virtual queue system. Let's see, there are a lot of questions coming in. One is whether we'll provide the PowerPoint presentation later. I can definitely say yes. I'm pretty sure we'll send that out with whoever registered for the webinar. So that one was easy. One here. One is here on the integration options for once we have a virtual queue set up in line. Let me see. So what if you actually had a virtual queue set up for check-in and then one for security and then for potentially one further downstream? Could you actually track the same passengers throughout this process and see how they're clearing the different elements? Mike, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so theoretically we could. I mean, here what we're showing here is kind of the phase one approach, right? Where you get the most bang for your buck for the path of least resistance, and that's arriving passengers into the airport by enabling this constituency base to effectively wait from the safety and comfort of their home or method of transport without having to worry about safe social distancing on site. And then when they are on site, to be able to go through without having to wait. We can theoretically, you know, through phase two and so forth, we can make serious value propositions and other elements of the airport model as well. And we could track the passenger all the way through. This is just where we want to start.
Yeah, then I think we have time for one more. There's one here on what is your expected implementation time from kind of get-go until you have a working solution. So I'd say what we're looking at from a technical perspective would be about 2 to 3 months. I think there's definitely in that period also going to be the considerations around how do you get to sign up passengers. Maybe you want to start out with a proof of concept to see, okay, that the concept is working. So I think from a technical point of view, we can get going within 3 months, probably 3 to 6 months if we have to have an airline partner or other with us on this process, and also wanting to create the awareness around it. But it's something that we could deploy pretty quickly and get going with in a short period.
And I would just add to that, and that's of course accurate, but the nice thing here is because everything is built in the cloud using artificial intelligence, we're not recreating the wheel each time here. So we can leverage prior deployments to shorten the implementation cycle for future airports as we go through the gamut here.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much sums it up. We're towards the end. There are a lot of good questions coming in. We didn't catch all of them, but thanks a lot, everybody, for supplying the questions. As I said, we'll send out both the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation afterwards, and do feel free to get in touch with us if you have any additional questions. Thanks from my side.
Take care.